If you've been with me through this series, you already know this conversation has been building. We started by talking about the hidden cost of being the reliable one, the one people count on, the one who always says yes, the one who holds everything together. Then we moved into what it actually looks like to start saying no and how uncomfortable that can feel. And in the last episode, we talked about over-explaining why even when we say no, we feel the need to justify it, maybe soften it, or walk it back. But here's the question that sits underneath all of that. If we know what to do, if we've decided we want to change, why is it so hard to actually do it? Why do we fall back into the same patterns, saying yes when we mean no, overcommitting, over-explaining, even when we told ourselves this time will be different? Because at some point, this stops being about awareness and starts being about something deeper. Welcome to the new chapter of the Her Resources podcast. I'm your host, Linda Misakadis, and I'm so excited to be stepping into this next season with you solo. This podcast has always been about amplifying women's voices, exploring the challenges we face in HR, leadership, and life, and sharing the tools and inspiration we need to thrive. And now, I'm taking that mission even deeper. You'll hear real conversations with bold and authentic women, as well as reflections from me on everything from pay equity and burnout to confidence, leadership, and the messy, beautiful journey of growth. This is more than just a podcast, it's a community, a space for us to learn, lead, and lift each other up. Welcome to this new beginning. This is the Her Resources podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Her Resources podcast, where we go beyond surface level advice and get into the real work of growth, leadership, and showing up differently in our lives and in our careers. And this is exactly why I'm so excited for today's conversation, because we're not staying at the surface. I'm joined by Katherine Flechaus, licensed clinical social worker and core belief strategist, who brings a completely different lens to this conversation. She introduces the idea of safeguards, patterns of behavior that aren't random and aren't weaknesses, but were actually adaptive strategies we developed to protect something deeper. And what makes this so powerful is that it reframes the entire conversation. Because maybe the reason change feels so hard isn't because you're not disciplined enough or confident enough. It's because part of you still believes this behavior is the safest option. So today we're going to go deeper. We're going to talk about why we default back to old patterns and what's actually happening in our brain and bodies in those moments, and what it really takes to create change that actually sticks. If you've ever felt stuck between knowing and doing, if you've ever questioned why change feels so much harder than it should, this conversation is going to shift the way you see yourself. Welcome to the studio, Katherine.
Thanks, Linda. I'm so happy to be here. I love talking about this stuff.
Well, I love talking about this stuff as well. And, I just want to set the stage for everyone. It's kind of like if you've ever felt like the reliable one. I just recently
Mhm.
did an episode that's going to be coming out around the reliable one. Or if you've struggled to set boundaries, which is
Mhm.
really hard to do, especially for women. Or if you've ever felt stuck between awareness and action, then this one is going to be the episode for you for sure. So, Katherine, I just want to get kind of started on talking about the gap between knowing and doing. So, talk a little bit about the idea of safeguards and why do we find ourselves in these patterns?
Right. Because a lot of the times, the gap between knowing and doing is understanding the why we're doing what we're doing. And that I have noticed over time. I have worked through every life stage. I've worked with kids, I've worked with adolescents, I've worked with adults, I've worked with seniors. And so I've seen these patterns play out. What we saw in adolescence is now popping up in adulthood, is, then
Mm,
popping up later in life. So what it really is there's something driving why we do what we do. And if we
Okay.
don't understand the why, then we
Yeah.
keep doing it, right? We can recognize that that's the awareness. Oh, there I go again. I didn't set that
Mhm.
boundary. I said yes when I didn't want to say yes, right? That's awareness.
Yeah.
And we're aware that we do the same behavior. Yes, I'd be happy
Mhm.
to do that. Of course, I'll take on that task. It's the gap is why. Why do we do that? And that's what the
Yeah.
safeguards are.
That
They
makes a
help
lot of
explain the
sense.
why.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like so when we start to recognize this, and I think unfortunately for women, we don't recognize it till much later in life
Mhm,
either.
mhm,
But I know for me, I'm almost 60 and I'm still kind of like I just over the last few years
mhm,
started to recognize these patterns of behavior and creating the awareness. But to
mhm,
your point, I still don't necessarily know the why behind
mhm,
some of those things. There may be certain things I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I kinda remember that
mhm,
this might be the reason that created that
mhm,
behavior," but talk a little bit more about the safeguards. Can you dig into
mhm.
that a little bit with
Sure.
us?
And the reason why you've had that experience, I've had that experience, so many women do, is we're so busy doing, right?
Yeah, oh,
We're getting the
yes.
next thing done, we're getting the next task done that we don't stop to ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing, right?
That makes sense, yeah.
So the safeguards are reactions that developed from how we understood the world at a certain point in time. So,
Okay.
like, for women, let's say,
Mhm.
and to kind of dovetail um, with your I'm sorry, I forgot the name that you called it. The person who does everything.
Oh, the
Um,
reliable one.
the
Yeah,
reliable one. I'm thinking
yeah,
of
yeah,
my
yes.
safeguard is the refiner. I was stuck on refiner.
Yeah, no,
um,
for sure.
the reliable one is because we were conditioned from a very young age, especially those of us of a certain age, right? We can
Yeah,
hope that things are changing.
we do
Um,
hope.
but definitely for me, growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was still very specific expectations for women, right?
Yeah.
We were to be we were to be nice. We were to always
Mhm.
consider other people's feelings. We were to be quiet, right? We were to let
Yeah,
other people take center stage. We were the supporting
right.
cast, right?
Yeah.
And so that happens so subtly, right? We didn't go to a class that said, this is how you be a good girl, right?
Right.
It was
Yes.
taught to us slowly through our families, through school, through friends, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so we start to sort of understanding the world like that. Then we go to school, right? And relationships become so important, especially in adolescence, right? And belonging and acceptance so important. So you find yourself doing whatever you need to do to stay with the group of people that you want to be with, right? Whether
right,
that's
yeah.
just a group of friends, whether you want to be with the popular kids,
Mhm.
whatever. And so that reinforces, oh, if I don't pay attention to how this person, right, that the leader of the
Yeah,
group is,
yeah,
and I don't make her feel good about herself, then I'm going to get the repercussions. Maybe I'll get kicked out of the group, right?
right,
So,
yeah.
so that's where the threat comes in. Is the not
Okay,
acceptance,
okay.
especially, in this particular area. And so we develop strategies for
Okay.
managing that, right? So
Yeah,
maybe I become very attuned at reading the room. I can walk in a room and know how everybody's feeling, right? I can sense the mood, or I can pivot quickly. If I've started to say something and I see that's not being accepted, I can step back, I can adjust, I can be malleable. These are all the
yeah.
things that keep the relationship intact because we're
Okay.
focusing on the other and not ourselves. Because
Yeah,
again, that's how we were raised, right? Focus on the
that's
other,
true.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
And so then, oh, this worked, right? I kept the relationship safe. I'm still part of this
yeah.
group. I haven't embarrassed my family. I'm still part of that
Right.
group, you know?
Yes, yes,
Um,
yeah.
and so we keep doing that because it worked at one point. And that's why I call it
Mm,
a safeguard because at one point it worked,
that's
right? It
true.
kept us safe, it kept the relationship intact.
That
And
makes sense.
then we got older, right? And we had more
Mhm.
autonomy. right? We weren't
Right.
stuck in the same classroom with the same group of kids for 8 hours a day,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
We were adults who could make decisions,
Mhm.
but we kept doing these same things because, again, we went into automatic mode and we
Yeah.
just did this. We just knew this became something we were skilled at. Um,
That
and
makes
it
sense.
worked until it stopped working.
Till it
And
doesn't.
that's
Yeah.
what we see, later in life when we're saying yes when we want to say no,
That's
if that
really
makes sense.
interesting. And no, it makes a ton of sense because what that kind of helps is to recognize that we have, like, I've always thought of myself as a bit of a chameleon
Mhm,
throughout, being young, and I'm sure a lot of women or people in general, but I'm talking about women that do that same thing, where we're adapting to the situation, the
mhm,
group,
mhm,
whatever it is, and to your point, never once thinking about how it's making you feel or how does
mhm,
this, affect maybe your well-being at all.
mhm,
It's always about everyone and everything
mhm,
else. And then you do find yourself at a certain stage in life when you're kind of alone in your thoughts, whether it's, if
mhm,
you had children and now they're out of the home,
mhm,
or if you're, if you didn't have children, but maybe you are winding down in your career,
mhm,
if in your spousal relationships, it seems like all of a sudden you're alone in your thoughts and you find yourself really doubting and questioning and kind of
mhm,
looking at all of those
mhm.
things. So
Right.
it does make a lot of sense, those patterns of behavior.
Mhm,
And I hadn't really thought about it until you said that too, and thinking about as a young person and the impact that
mhm,
had and how we do carry that all the
mhm.
way through. And
Yep.
I think too, I don't know if you agree with this, but I also kind of feel like, especially to your point of people of a certain generation, we also didn't talk about any of this stuff. So
Oh,
we
no.
never
Yeah.
discussed our feelings. We never discussed problems. Everything was
Mhm,
good and we just swept it under the carpet and we just
mhm.
kept moving forward.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And I like to use the term safeguard because it sort of it's more strength-based, right? It's
Okay.
so much of
Yeah.
the world, is pathologizing. What's wrong with you?
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
I I actually when I was, working with, adolescents in the legal
Uh-huh.
system years ago,
Okay.
in a housing program, one
Okay.
of the concepts that they brought to us to help us think about kids in these really tough situations was if you say, "What's wrong with you?" Right? That's very negative. If you say, "What happened to you?" then there's empathy. And it's such a simple change of words,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
when you've got this teenage girl screaming in your face and you think, "What happened to you?" You
Yes,
respond so differently than,
you do.
"What is wrong with you? Get out of my face," right?
That's
Uh,
true. Yeah.
and I've
Yeah.
carried that message with me for years. It was just, again, so simple and so meaningful, and I
Yeah.
try to bring that into my work all the time. Like, why do we have to make things wrong, right? Things happen to people, people
Yeah.
adapted. And
Yep.
so let's look at it as adaptive and strength-based because there are
Right.
strengths with those, right? I mean, a person who can read a
There is.
room,
Oh, yeah.
it's a great strategy, right? It's
Yep.
it's a great
It
skill, not a
definitely is.
strategy, it's a great
Yeah.
skill, yeah. Um, but we only look at the bad side of that, the unuseful side, which is, "Oh, now you're the go-to that everyone's gonna go to,
Yeah.
and you're feeling now put out."
Yep.
Uh,
I have exciting news. The Her Resources podcast is opening sponsorships. If your brand supports women in HR and leadership, think talent, well being, learning, pay equity, coaching, productivity, or mission driven tech, this is your moment. Our listeners are decision makers and change makers who show up for real conversations and practical tools every week. We offer flexible options, pre roll or mid roll host reads, series sponsorships, and thought leadership integrations that highlight your story without the fluff. Ready to connect with a highly engaged audience and grow with us? Email contact@herresourcespodcast.com and put sponsorship in the subject line. I can't wait to collaborate. We do. And I think about for myself, to just make it relatable is I was very introspective, a real introvert and very shy. And so for
Mhm,
me, kind of what you were talking about reading the room, for me, I would go in, I'd be the wallflower, right? I
mhm,
wasn't going to go and talk to anybody. But in doing so, what I did start to learn from that is reading human behavior, right? So
mhm,
watching and seeing how people are reacting, how they're interacting. And when I got older and I started to develop a level of self-confidence, then I was able to use those
mhm,
skills that I had obtained during that time, which to your point though, were viewed very negatively.
mhm,
I do remember people, thinking and then also putting you in a bucket of
mhm.
who you were because, well, if this person is that, they're not capable of this, right? Because
Right,
we also like
exactly.
to put people
In
into
buckets.
buckets
Mhm.
based off what we think.
Yeah,
Yeah, no.
yeah,
You talk
absolutely.
about normalizing and why that's so important.
Mhm.
Why do you think normalizing the behavior and just kind of like this whole why is that important?
Because we need to be supportive of each other, and
Okay.
we need to stop looking at the negative in everything, right?
Yeah.
We've become a very negative society in a lot of
Yes, we
ways,
have.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so much easier to look at the fault in somebody than,
Mhm.
than the positive. And you you can't move forward if you feel like you're broken, there's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
you need to be fixed. But if you can tap into your inner strengths, which everybody has,
Yeah.
um, then you normalize that experience. So, one, there's no shame connected to it anymore,
Right.
right? Once you
Yeah.
normalize it, you take away the shame.
Mhm.
Um, and that shame is a big barrier. And that is a big piece in a lot of the safeguards is fear of shame,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and so we take that away. And in my work where I help people to go back in time, not to stay stuck, but to figure out that
Yeah.
origin, I call it an origin story. Where did
Yeah.
your core beliefs start? What was the origin of
Okay.
that? Watched
Right.
a little too many Marvel movies. I love my origin stories.
You and my husband would get along really well.
Excellent. Um, and so it's not to go back and find blame, right? It's not to blame your
Right.
mother or your teacher or your
Yes.
priest or your
Yeah.
sister, or to find shame in anything, but it's to say, oh, that's where it started. You know, they
Yeah.
were doing the best they could. And of course, I'm not normalizing abuse, neglect,
Of
the big
course,
stuff,
yeah,
right?
yes, exactly, yep.
I'm talking about just regular human behavior. We do the
Right.
best we can, you know,
Yep. Yeah.
with what we have,
Yep.
what was given to us, what we had in the world. And so you just recognize it as that's what it is, right? You
Yeah. No, that
normalize it.
makes sense.
And
Yeah.
then it removes a lot of barriers. So, okay, we can just look at this. This is just a behavior. This is just a thought pattern. Thoughts can
Right.
be changed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why
I
I
like
like to
that.
normalize it.
Well, I like a lot about what you were saying there in that this idea, because I do think that we find ourselves, one, feeling that we're broken. And
Mhm,
so I did like that you called that out as far as like, we're not broken. It's not
mhm,
something to be fixed. And I
mhm,
think, that's important for us to remember. But also, I like the idea of normalizing and kind of looking back and seeing what created the pattern
mhm,
of behaviors that got us here today. But
mhm,
also to your point, and not that doesn't mean that we have to go back, is you see that so often as parents are not are human beings,
mhm,
and they only had the tools that they had
mhm,
to do the best job that they could
mhm,
with those tools. Some had better tools
mhm,
than others, and so they were able to handle situations differently.
mhm,
again, it's not about blaming anyone,
Mhm,
and you're right, we're not normalizing bad behavior, we're
mhm,
talking about normal
right.
patterns of behavior here, but in those situations there, I do think that if we can get past the blaming, we can get
Mhm,
past the believing that we're broken,
mhm,
and then we focus more in on the why and
mhm,
normalizing it, then maybe we also increase our self-awareness, and that helps us maybe embrace ourselves a little bit
right,
more, right?
right.
Yeah.
So if you
Wow.
can see the ability to read a room as a positive, right? Then think about how you can build off of that and how you can be a good team leader because you change from trying to make everybody comfortable so there's no tension to learning when to pull the tension out, right? Like
Yeah. Yep.
maybe I need to put a little tension into this group to get things moving. Maybe today's a good day to hold off a little,
Yeah.
and so
Yep.
it becomes a strength that you can use to move forward instead of
Yep.
something that you should be ashamed of and put away.
Right. Yeah.
It's the
That
way
makes a lot.
you use it that becomes the difference.
Yes. And that makes a lot of sense because now you've put it in your own toolbox, right, in
Mhm,
ways to do that. I'm curious though, why do you think that we find ourselves defaulting back to the old patterns so easily? Because one of the things that I talked about in the episode on the reliable one is that idea that, for me personally, I always say yes. I'll overextend myself. It's something that I do frequently, and even when I then, want to change that pattern of behavior, oh man, the guilt that I carry
mhm,
along with that. And then when I do say no, then I feel bad about that. So then I want to make up excuses or reasons, or maybe we even lie, right? We
mhm,
say, oh, well, I can't do that because of this, this, and this, because we feel like, oh, well, they'll
mhm.
take it better if I add some extra stuff to it than
Right,
if I
right.
just say no. So why do we have that tendency to just want to default back into those old patterns?
I think it's layered. One is what,
Okay.
we talked about in the beginning, which is just we're just used to doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's what everybody expects from us. Um,
Right.
but it's really about if you think about the neuroscience of our brains, right?
Mhm.
We have tracks that our
Okay.
thoughts flow from A to B, right?
Okay.
Um, I tell people to think of it like Google Maps, right? So
Okay.
you pull up Google Maps and, I want to go from my house to your house, and it gives
Mhm.
me the most direct or the one that has the
Yeah.
most tolls or however you want to look at it, right?
Right.
And then there's
Yeah.
these couple other little grayed out options, like option 2
Yeah.
or 3.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what our brains have been conditioned to do. We have the thought, we have the reaction. It happens so
Okay.
quickly because that's such a super highway of thought that we
Yeah.
don't stop to think. It's happening before we even realize we've made a decision,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's just brain functioning. That's the
Okay.
pathway that our brain is used to working. When we have that trigger, we do this action, and so it
Okay.
takes
Okay.
interrupting that thought process, which in the
Yeah.
beginning usually happens after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't stop an automatic thought because it's
No.
automatic, right?
Right.
Right. But we can realize after the fact. And
Okay.
as we
Okay.
start to draw attention to it and we start to try to make different choices,
Mhm.
then the process slows down. And now
Okay.
now you're kind of driving over a gravelly road. So you have to go a little
Yeah.
slower. There
Okay.
might be some divots and some potholes.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
so it's the awareness that then leads to slowing down, that
Okay.
then leads to new thoughts, so that eventually you'll have a new superhighway going this
Okay.
way.
Okay. Yeah.
And this highway will kind of fade off because when we don't
Okay.
use the pathways, they fade.
That makes sense. Well, and I wonder too, is there part of it where the reason why, we think we're protecting,
Mhm,
maybe we're protecting the relationship, or to your point, we were maybe I want to belong, I don't want to
mhm,
get excluded from the group.
mhm,
I talk about like having FOMO, like if I say
mhm.
no,
Right.
then all of a sudden I'm sitting there wondering, well, now they didn't invite me to the
Right,
next one.
right,
So
right.
now what am I missing out on? And kind of putting that whole thing behind. Or maybe we even think we're protecting our identity. We
Mhm,
think like this is what people think of me, and so
mhm,
now I need to maintain that mask of identity because everybody thinks of me as the reliable one. And if I take that
mhm,
mask off, have I lost my identity somewhere along the line? Can you talk a little bit about like how do we one identify that idea, because sometimes in thinking we're protecting we may actually be harming, right?
mhm.
By
Right,
our behaviors. Yeah.
right, right. Because, like, in your episode where you're talking about the reliable one, you were talking
Yeah.
about, the work things that we do that don't advance our career,
Yes.
right? And
Exactly.
that gives us positive feedback, right? So these behaviors give
Yes.
us oh, people are they come to me when they
Yes.
need something. They come to me when they're
Mhm.
having a problem.
I'm
And so
revered. Yes,
right,
exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
So that reinforces this identity we have that, like, I'm
Okay.
the reliable one. I'm the one that people will come
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
We have to stop and think about what the cost is to us. And
Okay.
again, as
Okay.
women, we don't, right?
No, we really don't.
At I was so reliable at a job that I was exhausted, and the best thing that happened to me was getting laid off because I couldn't get out of my own way of the identity that I developed there of really being the go-to one. If something needed to get done, people came to me, and didn't that make me a great person, right?
Yeah. Yes,
But it
absolutely.
didn't get me the promotion when new administration came in and didn't
Exactly.
understand me, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so it's those things, right? So we we're holding on to something that's giving us purpose. When we take the time to do a cost analysis, what is this really costing us? Um,
Right.
that's when we can start to make change, right? So, am I so stressed out at work, right? Because I'm doing for
Mhm.
everybody that I come
Right.
home and I have nothing left to give to my family. And my
Yeah.
relationship with my kids is jeopardized, or my relationship with my partner is jeopardized. Those are the costs that we have to stop and look at, you know?
Yeah. That's a good
Um,
point. I was
and
listening to, Mel Robbins had Barbara Cochran on her podcast,
okay,
I don't know, a few
not
episodes ago,
familiar with her.
and have you ever watched, Shark Tank?
Mhm,
She is a little powerhouse, she was one similar, in age, where we are in our lives, but so grew up in a time when women, you know, couldn't get a loan, couldn't get all of these
mhm,
sorts of things, but
mhm,
just this little powerhouse. But one of the things that I really respected about what she said, so as she's worked so hard to get where she is, and she went through all of these things we're talking about, but today she does talk about really protecting what you were just talking about there, where
mhm,
when she's at work, she's at work. And so her
mhm,
family respects the fact that when she's there, she has a level of boundary
mhm,
around that. But then when she's at home, similarly, she expects her work to have
mhm,
that same level of respect and create that boundary.
mhm,
I think most of us, we don't know how to separate and create
mhm,
those boundaries, which is kind of what you were talking about
mhm,
in that job, right? You didn't know how to establish the boundary, even though you knew that you weren't doing anything to benefit yourself
mhm.
and it was probably impacting
There
everything
was
about you,
definitely
right?
yes,
Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah, no.
And so, again, awareness when you start to slow down enough, like, and look at what's going on with me, right? Am I maybe having
Right?
signs of burnout? Am
Yeah,
I did I not get a promotion that I thought I was due for, right? So instead of
right.
going into angry blaming mode, right, where I'm going to
Yes,
blame this person, I'm going to
yes.
blame this person, we just take a look at ourselves and say, is there something that we could have done differently? Again, not
Okay.
blaming, right?
Yep, yep.
But just saying, what could I have done differently? What did I miss? Where did I not self promote? And then why? Why didn't I? right? And that goes back to understanding those core beliefs. Like if I don't believe that I'm good enough, I don't have enough experience, I don't have good enough boundaries, so people walk all over me, so nobody sees me as a leader, right? I haven't I haven't said I'm not a leader, but what other leaders see is, "Oh, she's a pushover," or she'll do anything. So we look at those things and that
Yeah.
underlying belief of, "Why do I think that? When this thought comes into my head, why do I think it? Is it still true today?"
Okay. Yeah, that makes a
And
lot
then
of sense.
right, we always have to balance that with, um, I have people look at what is truth and what is a belief, right?
Okay.
Especially in the
Yeah.
work environment or even in our relationships, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we hold back because we need to. We're working in a very
Mhm.
toxic environment. The only way to get anything done is to smooth the leader,
Right.
right? And maybe what we learn is that we need to work ourselves out of that employment and into another one,
Right. Right,
right?
right.
So that's the truth. So there's a reason why you're behaving, and then you're deliberately doing that, right? Which is different than
Okay.
an automatic thought.
Yes.
On
Yeah.
the other hand is, do I not believe that I'm worthy? Do
Mhm.
I believe it's my role to make everybody happy? And when I
Right.
start to challenge that belief, why can't I be the one to be happy? Why can't I be the one to go to somebody else? Why can't I be the
Yeah.
one to get the promotion?
Mhm.
Then we start making different choices.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
never a
Yeah.
cut and dry. I never want to say to
No.
anyone, just because you're using a safeguard means that, you could be doing something different. Because sometimes we need to,
Right.
right? We're in an unhealthy relationship, and maybe the best thing to do is to just be nice and quiet until we have
Right.
an exit strategy.
Are you ready to take your podcast to the next level? Let LJM Productions help you sound your best. We specialize in podcast editing, production, audio restoration, and mixing, ensuring every episode is polished, professional, and ready to wow your audience. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned podcaster, we'll handle the technical details so you can focus on sharing your voice. Partner with LJM Productions today and hear the difference.
Well, and being a little vulnerable in what you're saying there as well is I think that, it is it is hard sometimes when, with what you were talking about there where you think you're not worthy, you don't believe
Mhm.
and so then when you've believed that for such a long
Mhm.
time, then when you do step outside of that, then you feel like, "Oh, I'm being selfish.
Mhm.
I probably don't deserve that. So and so probably deserves that more. Or, you know what, they'll get me next time because, I wasn't qualified or
Mhm.
I didn't have this credential or whatever.
Right.
You start to make excuses for
Mhm.
yourself
Mhm.
along those lines as well, right? Where
Right.
does that excuse making kind of come from where we kind of default back into those old patterns and then we make excuses for ourselves? Where does that what causes us to do that?
Well, because we're feeding the limiting belief, right?
Okay.
The belief says we can't, and so then we
Yeah.
find all these reasons that support that belief,
Okay. Okay,
right?
that
So
makes
we're
sense.
gathering
Yeah.
evidence to support the belief. Oh,
Right,
right
right.
there, and oh, right there, right? But when you recognize that, then you can
Yeah.
start gathering evidence to the opposite, right? Just like you
Okay.
gathered evidence to the belief, you can gather evidence
Yeah.
to the opposite of that. And
Okay.
that's why we default back to that because, oh, that makes sense, right? Because that's what
Mhm.
the voice in my
Yeah.
head says. You're not worthy. And here's proof of why you're not worthy.
Right, right. Yes.
And
And that feels safe, right? I mean,
Mhm.
even though it doesn't necessarily feel good, but it
right,
feels safe,
right,
right?
right.
Okay.
There's a
Yeah.
comfort level in what we know, even if it's
Yeah.
not what's the best for us, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. gosh. Ah,
Yeah.
man, the human mind is so complex in the way
Mhm,
that all of this happens. But oftentimes it's happening in our body before it
mhm,
happens in our
mhm,
mind, right?
mhm,
What are some of the things we start to see like shifting inside? Because I know, well, you read about this where you ignore, and eventually your body, hence some of the burnout things, your
mhm,
body just shuts down, or
mhm.
all of a sudden you are sick, or this is
Right.
happening. Those are all kind of driving from
Mhm,
sometimes what's happening in
mhm.
the mind, right? Why does that happen? Like what causes our bodies to react that way?
Well, I mean, there's so many different reasons, right? But let's start with something as simple as tension, right?
Okay. Yep.
Tension we feel in our body, and we feel it in our body
Yeah.
because our muscles are contracting,
Okay.
right? And, so our muscles are contracting around a nerve. Then that
Uh-huh.
nerve gets aggravated, and now we have this pain, right? We have this shooting pain
Yes.
in our back, right?
Yeah.
We
Yep.
didn't
Yep.
do anything to our back, it's our muscles constricting around the nerve, right?
Yes. Okay.
Or we get it in a tension headache. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, we have this headache because we've been squeezing, maybe our jaws, right? Without
Yes.
even
Yeah.
realizing it, right? We're
Uh-huh.
we're clenching our jaws. That's creating a tension headache.
Yeah.
And as this goes on and on, right, the body gets worn down from this constant stress. Right? I'm sure there's, we talk about cortisol all the time and, that stress hormone. I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, but I know it plays
Yep.
in there,
Yep.
right? Um,
Yes, it does. Yeah.
right? Because what our body does, at our very core, right, we're fight
Mhm.
or flight. Those are our natural
Yeah.
basic instincts way back there in the back of our brain, in our primitive brain is still the fight or flight. But
Yeah.
because we've evolved, the fight or
Mhm.
flight is not a life or death anymore, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a screaming boss, it's an irritated customer,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
so but our hormones, our body chemicals are still reacting in that fight or flight,
Right.
right? We get that
Yeah.
rush of adrenaline, and then it's gotta dissipate in our body, and if everything is a constant stressor, how many times have you found yourself, you're driving to work and before you know it, you're holding on to the steering wheel tighter, your shoulders are up, and now you've got
Yeah.
neck pain, not because
Right.
there's anything wrong with your spine, but because your
Yeah.
shoulders are up where they're not supposed to be. And by
Right.
the time you get to work, you're exhausted because your body's
Yeah.
physically tired and it hasn't even done
Yeah.
anything yet.
Right, right, yes. No,
Right? You
it's the
ever
worst.
run a marathon?
Yeah, there's no reason to feel this
Right,
way.
right.
A friend of mine and I were talking about this morning is that, we're, both talking about clenching
Mhm,
because, I used to just clench at night, but now
mhm,
I'll find myself clenching during the
mhm.
day as well,
Right.
and that's what they were talking about as well is that, and I was not even consciously aware of doing it until I went to the dentist and they said,
Mhm,
"Hey, you're affecting your teeth and this is going on. Are you clenching?" I'm like, "No, I don't clench." Well, now I'm consciously aware of the
mhm,
fact, and so now I notice when it's happening and trying to kind of stop myself or even maybe identify what the trigger is in the first
mhm,
place, to your point. Because sometimes we're like, exactly what you said, "I've got this
mhm,
back pain," but it's really not a back pain at all. It all
mhm.
started from the tension
Right,
somewhere else in my body that then turned into that. So,
right.
man, it's so crazy how
Mhm,
complex it all is, but
mhm.
honestly, how simple it all is all at the
Right,
same time, right?
right.
It's like it's just a weird dichotomy there. Why does change feel impossible sometimes? Because I know I get there sometimes where I'm like, man, I want to do this and I'm
Mhm,
going to put in the work and I'm going to
mhm,
make these things happen. And then I'm like, "Oh, man, this just I'm never gonna be able to change this. Just this is just who I am, so I
mhm.
guess I should accept it." Why does that happen to us?
That happens because we don't connect, again, to that why beneath, right?
Okay, okay,
Um,
yeah,
because change is hard because we just talked about all that stuff your brain has to go through, right, to to create those new pathways, right? That's a lot of conscious thought. That's a lot of experimentation. So that's hard. But the other reason is, and this is where the why comes in, if we don't intervene at the right level, right?
Right.
So, you read a self help book and it tells you, to stand in front of the mirror and say these mantras about how wonderful you are,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
But you've got this message playing in the back of your head on auto
Yeah.
repeat that you're not worthy. So you can
Yes.
say it, but the minute, and you can believe it in front of the mirror, but the minute you're challenged with that in a real life situation, right,
Yep.
that falls apart. If you understand why you don't think you're worthy,
Okay.
and then you confront that through mantras,
Okay.
right, then you're going to have more success because the mantra isn't a band aid, right?
That makes
It's a
sense. Yeah.
medicine. Right, so
That
now
makes
now you're working from the inside, right? You're not just
Yeah.
covering it up.
Why is that so hard to do? I mean, because I think that's the part that I think, and I don't think it's that we're afraid of the work, but it's
Mm-mm.
hard to make that connection there. Do you think it all kind of leans back into that figuring out the why, side of all of that? Because to your point, if you don't figure out the why, you can't come forward, but sometimes the figuring out the why can really be challenging in those situations. So, how do you start to kind of peel that back and identify like what is that why that's
Mhm,
causing me to feel this way? Because we've all done it. We've read the self-help books, we've
mhm,
done the mantras, we've listened to the podcast,
mhm,
we've
mhm,
all of these different things. And then we're all gung ho, and then we find ourselves right back where we started from.
mhm. Well, I think there's sort of 2 responses to that question,
Okay.
and the first is that, we've become a society of instant gratification, right? So, we
That is
want change
true.
to happen now, right?
Yes,
I
we
mean,
do.
I wanna lose weight, but I want it to
Right?
happen now, right?
Yes, me too.
And I don't really wanna do the work, right?
Yeah,
I want to believe somebody who's gonna sell me a pill that says it's all gonna go away, right? And then
right.
stay off, and I can eat pizza 3
Yes.
times a day, right?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
the other side, right? We want that, and then but we also wanna keep doing what we've
right,
always done. Yes.
right. And so, that's one of the reasons why I think change is hard
Okay.
is that when it's not an instant gratification, we give up easily
Yeah,
because, again,
that makes
we've been
sense.
conditioned to that. But the deeper work is actually having someone, you know, ask you the questions or have you think about the questions. Again, it's that slowing down and accepting that sometimes the best way is the longer way, that it's going to take time because, again, these have been with you potentially for years. If this belief started, when you were in elementary school because, you were the smartest kid in the class and you got all this praise for being smart and excelling, right? Or
Yes,
you were the best athlete in school and you had to keep being the best athlete because that's what gave you, acceptance, attention, right? So these have been around so long and you're not connecting them with the why, you're connecting them with the behavior. If I do this
okay.
behavior, I get acceptance, right?
Okay,
But
yeah.
why do I keep doing this behavior, right? Because if I don't understand why I keep doing this behavior, I'm going to keep doing this behavior. And these other interventions aren't going to help long term. They might help in the moment, but then
Right.
once that old belief gets triggered again,
That
things
makes
fall apart.
sense.
And so in the work that I do, we work on resiliency plans because the bottom line is
Okay.
this stuff isn't going away, right? It will
Right,
get
right.
quieter. We will get better at it, but there will
Yeah.
still be times when it gets provoked. It gets
Okay.
popped up.
Yeah.
You're asked to, you decide to be on a podcast and then I'm having this panic this morning thinking, what am I thinking about? What am I thinking about going
Right.
on and talking? What do I know? Right. That's the
Yeah.
old limiting belief coming up.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
But I recognized it for what it was, and that's the work, right? I heard it
Right.
instead of
Okay.
reacting to it, and I'm like, "Oh, there you are. Hello, I haven't seen you in a while," you know?
Yeah.
And
No.
then I can start instead of finding all the negatives, right? We're talking about collecting all the
Right.
negatives to justify it. I can
Right.
think about, "Oh, well, this is what I know. This is what I've done. This is what I do every day. This is just a conversation."
Hey everyone, we're the Her Resources podcast, where women share real stories, real lessons, and the resources that help them succeed. We're always looking for inspiring women, business leaders, creatives, educators, and changemakers who want to share their journey and empower others. If that sounds like you, we'd love to hear your story. Reach out to us at contact@herresourcespodcast.com and let's start the conversation. Okay, okay.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense, because you're right. When I was thinking about the why, I was still focusing on the behavior. So
Mhm,
I'm still thinking about the that side of it, but not
mhm,
necessarily why the behavior. And so,
mhm,
yes, I could think back like as a kid or in school and the
mhm,
things that I heard
mhm,
around all of that. And so I was thinking more of the resulting behavior,
mhm.
not what caused the behavior in
Right,
the first place.
right,
Okay, that
right.
makes
Because
a lot of sense.
that is
Yeah,
such an instantaneous switch in your head
it is.
that
Yeah,
that's why we forget the why because the
right.
behavior happens before we realize we've triggered the why.
Okay, all right. Talk a little bit more about the resiliency side of it, because I do think that that is the one that's kind of been a theme of things I've been thinking about since the
Mhm,
end of last year as we've gone in to this year is exactly that, that man, the work is hard, right?
mhm,
That's why sometimes it's so much easier to just sit in where we are
mhm,
and play the blame game or
mhm,
the well, I can never change approach to it. So
mhm,
talk about resiliency and why that's so important.
mhm. Yeah, this concept I brought in from I did a little bit of work in, we now call it substance use
Okay.
disorders. We used to call it,
Yeah.
chemical dependency, different
Right.
things, right?
Yeah.
Is that in that world, it is
Okay.
accepted that relapse is part of recovery, right?
Oh,
So when
okay.
you're
Yep. Yep.
in
That's true.
alcohol or drug recovery,
Yeah.
they plan for it because it is part of
Okay.
some of it's physiological, some of it's
Yeah.
biological, some of it's situational. But so why wouldn't we take that into other things that are hard, right? Other things that we've been doing for so long. And so let's plan for it because how many times have we, you know, gotten to a point where we never think an old thought,
Right.
right?
Right. That's true.
Right. If
Yeah.
we go back to the dieting, right, we can lose a ton of weight. Does that mean that we've lost our desire for pepperoni pizza with sausage and
Right.
mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
right. So, but we have to be aware that, oh, we're going to have that feeling. It doesn't mean we have to give in to that feeling.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's what resiliency is about, right? It's about making it normal because then it's not a failure, right? Like, when I had my little moment of imposter syndrome this morning, right?
Yep.
It wasn't a
Yep.
failure, right?
No.
It was just an old trigger, an
Yep.
old friend coming to visit that you didn't want to come visit.
Right.
And so, e accepting that it's going to be there, then you don't feel like you failed. You're just like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I expected this visitor, and I'm prepared for it," right?
That is a
Sometimes the
fascinating approach.
Yeah, sometimes the visitor's in the door and sitting down at your kitchen table before you realize that they're there,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Yes.
sometimes you
Yes.
intercept them at the door. But
Yeah.
it's all about let's plan for what's gonna happen because again, that
I
takes
like
us out
that.
of the failure mindset. "Oh, I failed because I didn't."
Yeah. No. I like that because what you've talked about is awareness and now we've talked about acceptance. And
Mhm,
so that's the coming to accept who we are as people, but that
Mhm,
our behaviors don't have to define us,
mhm,
especially when we determine what our why is. And I
okay,
like the idea because I kind of think about it. My dad was an alcoholic. He quit
mhm,
drinking when I was younger, but I remember it was never that my dad was used to be an alcoholic.
mhm,
My dad was an alcoholic
mhm,
because there was always the chance, to your
mhm,
point, he could go back. And
right,
so that was one of the things that they kind of talk about is that
mhm,
you're always that. And so
mhm,
kind of in this situation, like I am always going to be an introvert, but
mhm,
my introversion does not have to define who I am in my world today. And
mhm,
I can identify those behaviors, understand those whys, and then I can do something different about it
mhm,
if I am willing to recognize those components, is what I'm hearing
right,
you say.
and you get to decide when you wanna be an introvert. Right? So,
Yes,
if
yes.
I'm going to go out and speak in front of people or go get together with
Mhm.
a group of people, right? I'm gonna sum up the energy that I need because introverts need
Right.
that energy, right,
Yep.
to go out and do that thing. And then I'm gonna
Yeah.
come home and give myself a day to do nothing, if that's what
Yeah.
I need,
Yeah.
you know?
Right,
And now
right.
I'm choosing. I'm not automatically doing it.
Yes. Yes. Now, another question I have for you, Catherine, because the other piece that we struggle with is so now we're kind of coming to terms with some of these things, but how do you deal with, like, your colleague or
Mhm,
your friend who they
mhm,
pull you right back into it,
mhm,
right? So
mhm.
they're like, "Well, wait a minute, that's not how you normally handle these
Right.
situations," or, "Oh, what are you talking about? I know you're gonna do this," type of thing.
Mhm.
How do you then start to deal with the rest of the
The
world,
rest of the world,
as
right.
you're coming to terms with
Mhm,
it? How do you now deal with everybody else? And what do you actually owe to everybody else in that
mhm.
process?
Right. And that's something that you have to learn about yourself, right? What do we owe
Okay.
other people? And then
Yeah.
there's a continuum, right?
Okay.
You owe your parents more than you
Yeah.
owe a coworker, right? Having
Right.
someone
Yep.
who's taking care of elderly parents, right? Did I
Yes.
want to do it? No.
Right. No, of course not.
Did
Yeah.
I feel that it was my responsibility to do?
Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so you do that. But you
Yeah.
don't owe a colleague to do
Right.
their work for them
Yeah.
or to, take on everything at the PTA because nobody else wants to because everyone else is so busy.
Right. Yeah.
But the important thing is to remember that just like we're learning to give ourselves grace, we
Mhm.
have to give we have to be mindful that we have taught these people how to treat us,
Okay.
okay?
That's true. Yeah.
And so we have to unteach them, and that's
Okay.
a slow process, right?
That is a slow process.
But it's good for you because you're learning to set boundaries and not feel guilty about it, right? 'Cause I've heard you mention
Yes.
that a couple
Yeah.
times, right? As women, "Oh my gosh, I'm setting a boundary on being selfish, on
Mhm.
being
Yeah.
self-centered," right?
Yep.
Um, we're not if we're taking care of ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not and again, not to the detriment of somebody else, you know,
Right.
"I'm gonna walk away from you drowning in a pond because I don't feel like getting
Right.
wet," right? That's not what we're talking about,
Yes, yes. No,
right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
This was your assignment, this was assigned to you, I don't need to do it for you.
yeah,
I have
yeah.
got to get this project done, I would love to talk to you, can we do coffee? You know, I can't
Yes,
have you come sit in
yeah.
my office right now, I'm on a deadline, right? Because
Right.
before, the older behavior, the older safeguard
Uh-huh.
would be, "Come in, sit down," and then I'm
Yeah,
staying late or I'm,
yep.
getting called on the carpet because my project wasn't done on time,
Right.
right?
Yes, yeah,
And
absolutely.
so it's slowly and we start with what we call the low-hanging fruit, you know? You
Okay.
don't start with the toughest person in your life to set a boundary with, right?
Right.
You start with the easy one, you know?
Yeah,
Um
yeah,
and then you move up. You build confidence. Oh, okay,
right,
this worked here. So now I'm gonna build on that confidence and I'm gonna move up to the next one and then the next one. And it's
right.
it's a process. Because again, it was a
It is a
process to get
process.
us here.
That's fair, and I think we forget that sometimes. I
Mhm,
think we're hard on ourselves,
mhm,
and to your point that we do live in a world of instant
mhm.
gratification, and it took us a long time to get to where we are, and so give ourselves a minute to unravel that, and then
Right.
also, when you have presented yourself as a certain way, it's
Mhm,
all maybe unfair to expect
mhm,
people to immediately accept this change in behavior,
mhm,
and maybe it's even harder if you haven't accepted that change in
mhm.
behavior yet, and so you're waffling, right? So you're
Right.
kinda go moving back and forth
Mhm,
between the, "Yeah, I'm
mhm.
not gonna be the reliable one like that anymore. I'm changing my behavior, but I'm still saying yes to everything
Right,
that you asked me to do." So
right,
yeah.
right. So you want the
Yeah, that makes
reliable one
sense.
to find one small thing to say no to and to
Yeah.
sit in the discomfort that is
Right.
going to come, right?
Yes.
Because let's
Yeah.
not kid anyone, saying no in the beginning doesn't make you feel good,
No, it doesn't.
right?
No,
Saying
no.
no later makes you feel good when you're like,
Yeah.
"Yes, I set that boundary. Look at me go. Look at me
Yeah.
take care of myself." But in the beginning,
Right.
let's talk about how uncomfortable that's gonna be. And so let's
Yeah.
plan for that discomfort, you know?
I like that. I like that idea of doing that. And you're right, is learning how to sit in the discomfort
Mhm.
and not, I talked about even creating that pause. So
Mhm.
if your natural reaction is to immediately say yes, maybe just pause a moment
Mhm.
or even say, let me think about that and get back
Mhm.
to you, just in case you're not comfortable with saying no yet,
Mhm.
gives you a chance to muster up the courage or whatever you
Right.
need to do to be
Right.
able to come back, but now you haven't put yourself in a position where you've either said yes or you say no, and now you're really
Right.
uncomfortable, and so now you
Right.
backtrack on that.
Right.
So, yeah, no,
Right.
I like that idea.
Mhm. And if
Catherine.
you said no when you meant to say or when you said yes when you meant to say no, then let's learn from that, right? Let's not just, again, say
Yeah,
it's a failure. Okay, let's pick through that. Where did it
right.
go? Where did the old behavior come in? Where did that old runway happen, you know?
Yeah, I like that idea too of reminding yourself that it isn't a failure, it's a learning
Mhm.
opportunity.
Mhm.
You stumbled, and now next time you're gonna do better, but it is a process, to change all of that.
Yeah.
Catherine, what is one small way that our listeners could create space this week? Like, what's just one small thing that they could do that would help them?
I think taking that pause. If you want to talk
Oh,
about one small place to start
yeah,
is when when you're having that thought like I should have said something and I didn't. Um
right.
I should have said no when I said yes. I should have, when the should haves,
Yes, the should haves, yeah.
Instead of rewinding the conversation over and over in your head, start thinking about,
Okay,
well, why did I do that? What made me feel like I couldn't, What made me
okay.
feel like I couldn't speak out in the meeting? What made me feel like I couldn't set that boundary with my spouse? And
Yeah,
that just, gets your brain started to think about other alternatives. Like we talked
okay.
about, slow it down.
Yeah.
I
Right.
actually, I have a worksheet on that. If, you
Oh,
want, I
okay.
could send you the link, for people
Yeah.
to
Yeah, we could put
use.
it in the show notes. I think
Yeah,
that would be great yeah, I would love
yeah.
to do that for our listeners, you bet.
'Cause it walks you through the process, like,
Okay.
what was the thought that I had? What was
Yeah.
it even talks about the bodily feelings, right? Because
Right, right.
that's
Yeah.
so part of it, and so what was the thought I had? What was I thinking and what was I feeling in my body? What was the
Yeah.
action I did? And then what was the result? So
Okay.
then once you
Okay.
see that all laid out, then you start to ask yourself, what was I protecting myself from? Right? That's where the safeguard comes in. What was
Oh,
the
okay.
safeguard? Why? Why was I doing
Yeah.
that? And
Okay.
that just is the very first step of awareness to
Yeah.
um, why why we repeat the same thing over and over again.
Makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
What is one question to ask yourself in the moment is what do you think, like would it be something like what do I think I'm protecting right now? Like what would you if I'm in that moment What's a good question to ask myself? So if I know like my why is okay, well I know that my why is because uh my dad always told me that I was the one who could do this, or he could always
Mhm,
rely on me, or
mhm,
whatever it was.
mhm.
I know that that's my why. What do I ask myself next in that moment to maybe be able to help me kind of process what's going
Mhm.
on?
Right. I would in that moment ask, "Did I need to?" Right?
Oh, I
Um,
like
did
that.
I
Okay.
need to do that? Did I need to use that
Yeah.
safeguard behavior? What what was I afraid would happen
Oh,
if I said
oh,
the opposite, right? Because
yeah.
we wanna start to think about what are the alternatives, right? Because we've been
Yeah.
one-track minded, you know, and that's where we start to get into the cost, what was the
Yeah.
cost to that? Why did I feel like, I didn't say something? Did I read something in the room? Okay, I did. I read that, my colleague over here, Jane was anxious. Well, next question is it my responsibility to manage her emotions? If my
Right.
idea contradicts her idea, but I feel
Right.
strong about my
Yeah.
idea,
Yeah.
right? Am I here to be an employee or am I here, to be Jane's friend? That
Oh,
kind of thing, right? So because
yeah.
that's the relationship piece, right? I want to keep the relationship, but
Right.
at the
Right.
cost to me, at the cost to the company that I let a good idea go.
Yeah.
This starts to generate alternative thoughts.
I like that. That is such great advice for that. For someone who's listening who maybe feels stuck in this cycle, what's the first thing that you want them to understand or maybe do differently starting today?
I want you to realize that you're not broken,
Mm,
right?
that's a good one.
Right? You are
Yeah.
not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You just need to understand yourself better and you need to give yourself grace for where you've been because
Yes.
then, and that you have strengths, right? We all have
Yeah.
strengths. We
Yeah.
wouldn't get where we are
Yeah.
if we didn't. And then you can start to build.
Okay. Yeah, I
Right?
like
But
that.
we
I like
don't
that
be
one, "I'm not
discouraged.
broken."
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good.
We're really
I re
not.
I I remember when I was a kid, we there was always the poster that said, something about, uh, I don't remember the first part. I just remember, because God doesn't make junk or something like that, but it was
Oh.
this little kid on that
Uh-huh.
poster. I think it was
Uh-huh.
probably part of, like, that scholastic thing where you could go
Oh,
in
yep.
and
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
get
Uh-huh.
your books and
I
everything, and there
remember
was
that.
that one poster that
Yeah.
was, like, this little kid, and it was like, and I don't remember the whole thing other than I remember it saying, "Because God doesn't make junk," or something
Uh-huh.
like that. I thought,
Right.
you know,
Yep.
it was a good positive affirmation,
Mhm.
back then for sure, but I really
Yep.
like what you said there, because I do think that we oftentimes find ourselves feeling like we're broken and that we're to blame in all of this,
Mhm.
right? So I can't change this because I'm broken. It's my fault that I'm broken because of this, this, and this. And so what I really like about what I've heard you say today is it's about reinforcing awareness. It's interrupting, which is what you
Mhm.
talked about, and then creating a new pattern. And the belief that we can't is just not true. And you've proven
Right.
that in the
Right.
fact that we can actually create that interruption and
Mhm.
start to redirect ourselves. Won't happen the first time, right? It's
No.
gonna take a lot of
Right.
work to make that happen, but it's definitely something
Mhm.
that is possible. So,
Yes, it
no.
is.
Yeah, I really
And
like that one.
stop paying attention to social media. Stop
Oh
comparing
my
yourself.
goodness. I will say that is one thing I am very grateful of growing up in a time when we didn't
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
any of the distractions that people have today.
Yeah.
We didn't have the internet. We definitely didn't have
Mhm.
social media. We had none of
Mhm.
those things. And I don't wanna say life was easier, but it was a little less
Mm.
complex, not having
Yes.
all those additional things to layer
Mhm.
on top to
Mhm.
compare myself to or to,
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
to yeah, so no, it's really crazy. Well, here's what I hope all of our listeners take away from this conversation today with Catherine is that you are not failing at change. And I really like that Catherine emphasized that point that you're not a failure and you are responding exactly the way you were wired to respond. So remember that you are who you are because of that. That's how you were designed. That's how you
Mhm,
were wired. But that doesn't mean you can't change it. So I want you to remember your patterns are not random. They're protective.
mhm.
Awareness alone isn't enough, but it's the starting point. Real change happens when you understand what's happening underneath the behavior. And most importantly, this is a practice, not a quick fix.
Excellent.
Um,
That sums it up.
yeah. Yes, yeah. Well, and so the next time you feel that automatic yes come out of your mouth, I really do want you to pause for just a second and use Catherine's method and say, what am I trying to protect right now? And that moment of awareness, that's where the change will begin. I know I've started practicing that pause and really stopping to think, why am I saying what I'm saying in this moment? And it's really helping. So, if this conversation resonated with you, I highly encourage you to connect with Catherine and learn more about her work. You can find her at Aligned Core Life Coaching and explore how she helps people uncover and shift these deeply rooted patterns. We'll put Catherine's contact information and we'll link her in the show notes so that you can connect with her. And if you found value in this episode, please make sure to like, follow, and share her resources with someone maybe who needed to hear this conversation. And as always, thank you for being a part of the Her Resources community. And Catherine, thank you for being here. I learned so much in our conversation today, and I'm so grateful that you did not allow your own patterns of behavior to stop you from being on this episode with me today because I would have missed having you here for sure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Well, we will have Catherine back again, and we hope to see you all in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. You've been listening to the Her Resources podcast, where women's voices, leadership, and growth take center stage. As your host, I'm here to remind you that the journey isn't always easy, but it is always worth it. Every step you take to build confidence, create impact, or use your voice is part of a much bigger story. It's the one that inspires others to do the same. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love it if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another woman who's ready to step into her power. And as always, thank you for being a part of this community. Together, we're not just changing conversations, we're changing the future.